do you feel that older generations of listeners are responding to the inclusion of multimedia, like, the ABC's website, like SMSing, and Twitter, like, or Facebook too?
Yeah, sure. I think there's Twitter. I think is got a smaller audience. Although the ABC News Twitter account has 50,000 followers across various age groups. I remember reading a stat that had Twitter more popular among the older people, or was it Twitter or Facebook? I can't remember. Anyway, but social media is very popular among older Australians. I mean, that's like half of Australia is on social media, and I don't know exact stats on how older people are interacting using that, but I do know that like there are plenty of Facebook pages for things like 702, Talkback, Australian Story, and I look at the ABC News Facebook page, which has I think only about 8,000 followers, and most of the people commenting on there look over 40. So I think there's plenty of interactivity. The idea that only
conversation.
Absolutely, and I think that the idea that the only young people are interacting on this is totally bunk. Like it's definitely the older generation is embracing it just as readily. So.
And what are some of the other things that ABC has done to foster a relationship with radio audiences and encourage interactivity? Is it specific to Twitter? Is it specific to Facebook? Can you text in and receive certain information, or story links? Like, what are some other things that you do?
Well, it's such a massive organisation, and certainly I don't head up social media, so I can only say what I've heard from people like Ping Lo, who is the social media, I'm not sure what her title is, but I think she's social media coordinator for the ABC. People like Gary Campbell, who's social media coordinator for ABC News. But as I understand it, every program has quite a different approach. Australian Story, as I said, they use their Facebook page to interact with viewers. They also have like a newsletter that goes out on email and get lots of replies, send out copies of replies that they've received, all this sort of stuff. And then, so it's about how are we encouraging interaction, basically. So I guess also the ABC News Twitter account, they make sure that someone real is manning it, not a bot. So it's not just headlines going out. So that when they receive replies, they will do their best to either reply to them directly or retweet those replies. So it's a sort of dynamic Twitter account. I think a lot of the local radio programs do a lot more to encourage interactivity. Certainly, like this is not so much for the older generation, but perhaps it's interesting to note what Triple J does. If you go to their Facebook page, they've got an obscene amount of followers, like tens of thousands, and they have a schedule that they follow religiously, apparently, I don't know, and that is like posting questions to viewers, especially talkback questions, to try to get talkback people lined up for their programs, posting links to things, concert previews, all this sort of stuff, and that's hugely popular, and they get so much interaction off the basis of that. And ABC News' Facebook page too will post a headline for a story plus a question saying, what do you think of the latest budget, and often we'll get 80 or 90 comments on it. So there's things like that we're doing.
Okay, perfect. And do you think that the increased use of podcasts and the ability for users to kind of personalize content to what their interests are affect the revenue for advertisers? I know it might not be specific to ABC Radio, but like in general, the radio industry, whether it be commercial or public.
Oh, certainly. I think that's the same thing as with newspapers. I mean, I think, basically when newspapers were aware that certain stories got hits, I think you could take Sydney Morning Herald, for example, their homepages changed dramatically. Some of the more tabloid stories started appearing up the top. I'm surprised that that's not really happening with radio. I think radios, well, at least certainly in the ABC, that's not happening. We have we keep an eye, but because we don't rely on revenue, we don't need to pander as much to what's popular. Occasionally with ABC News Online, there's people have muttered about they're putting up certain stories for hits, but I think by and large we go with what's important, not what rates. But around podcasting, I can't so much talk about revenue, but I do know, like, for example, Late Night Live, which is presented by Philip Adams. I think it goes for about an hour, and it features 2 or 3 interviews every night. And he's been on the ABC for decades, and he's very popular. And the show was just rolling along until they decided to introduce podcasting. And suddenly, Late Night Live became the most podcasted show in the ABC. I'm pretty sure you'd have to double check that, but this is the anecdote that I've heard. And the ABC sort of stood up and took notice. It's like this show is wildly popular, and especially for people who want a podcast, and they can break the show up into chunks and just take the interviews as they like it, or they can subscribe and take the whole show. We certainly have a lot of podcast subscribers to our Radio Current Affairs programs, and when those podcasts are down, I get lots of angry emails. So it's really been very, very popular, and in fact, I'm thinking of more creative uses of podcasting at the moment, like podcasting presenter interviews separately to the usual rundown of stories done by reporters, because I know that some of our listeners are perhaps more interested in the interview in particular than necessarily all the other content. So we've stopped thinking from like an all-over program point of view to much more segmented and making things suit certain types of listeners and their interests.
Perfect. And then our last question that we kind of were
Is that
wondering.